1696 has there been regulation of the press in Britain. The regulation of the press could come along at 13:30 GMT. That's the time that Lord Justice Leveson, just round a corner from where I'm standing, here very, very near Parliament Square, bang in the centre of establishment London, Lord Justice Leveson is going to be releasing his findings. I mean, it goes to sort of hundreds of thousands of words. It's a very, very big piece of work. He's listened to 600 witnesses, all about the ethics and the practices of the press. We've been hearing from a politician a few minutes ago. We're going to be hearing from journalists as well. We've got some young journalists here, students, Alex, Aurelia, Frabrizio, who are braving the cold. We're huddling together for a bit of warmth. Alex, first off, you're Scottish.
Yes.
Give us an idea. How big is ethics in the teaching of a young journalist like you? Do you get lessons in journalistic ethics and that sort of thing?
Yeah, there are specific lessons in ethics, but there's not so much of an emphasis on phone hacking as such. It's more like, well, this is what you should be doing, or this is how you should conduct your journalistic work.
Do they try to draw? I mean, do your tutors give you sort of moral lines? I mean, because many people go into journalism with a sort of, you know, an idea of purpose and principle and so on. Does that sort of tally up with your fellow students?
I think, well, yeah, it obviously differs between students, but I think some of us do have higher moral standards, but I'm not sure many people would go to great lengths to find a story. And
you're not necessarily taught those moral principles. Let's get a view from abroad as well. We have Frabrizio from Italy and Aurelia from Austria. From a perspective from outside, Aurelia, if I can start with you, does this seem a fuss about nothing, or is this the sort of thing that in Austria they would recognise? Do the papers work differently in Britain to elsewhere?
No, I don't really think so. In Austria we have a very special situation because one newspaper dominates 42% of the market. But I do think it's a very serious issue, especially because ordinary members of the public have been hurt by this and harmed. And I think this would have been taken as serious in Austria as it has been taken here.
Fabrizio, what about in Italy? I mean, I seem to remember reading somewhere that in Italy only about 10% of people read newspapers. Most people watch television, which doesn't have the controls that the BBC and ITV and the other broadcasters here do. Do you think that this is the sort of thing, that the kind of stories that we've been hearing from the witnesses to the Leveson Inquiry, the sort of thing that could happen in Italy? Is that how Italian papers work?
Not really. Italian papers are very not like the British papers, but I agree. I mean, in Britain there is a need for more regulation, independent regulation of course, but the situation as it stands now, especially from the point of view of a young journalist, you know, you cannot expect to go into work and to earn your daily bread, kind of forced morally to do things you don't want to do.
Do you think that's what the culture here breeds? Because we do have this noisy press. I mean, it's described by somebody a little earlier on the programme as the best press in the world and the nastiest as well. Do you think that's true?
I think it's true to an extent, but to another extent is also, you know, a very nice picture of the press in Britain. Again, from the point of view of a student in journalism, there is not a very bright future ahead, especially when it comes to print journalism.
Right. Okay.
So,
well, many thanks indeed, and stay with us, guys, as well, because Fabrizio, Aurelia and Alex are here, three journalism students. We were talking a little bit just before the news about whether or not you're taught ethics at school, and Alex, you were saying that you know, maybe you could get a little bit more. How do you learn, therefore, where that line is?
Well, how do we learn where that line is? I guess it's just essentially, well, it's not necessarily practice, but it's just more things like this inquiry, or to hopefully teach us where that line is, and emphasise that accountability and trust are essential parts of being a journalist.
Because presumably you only learn by seeing what journalists do. And have you been impressed, Fabrizio and Aurelia, have you been impressed by what you've seen British journalism do with phone hacking, but also with breaking big stories? It goes both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the British press has a lot to celebrate. For example, the MP expenses scandal, and even with phone hacking, it was The Guardian who broke the story.
So it was another paper breaking a story about the bad behaviour of the papers?
Exactly. So I do think there's hope for British journalism, and it's not all doom and gloom.
And Frabrizio, how would you learn where the lines are? Because, one mentioned there a fantastic recent story, the revelation of the expenses claimed by the people in that big house behind us, the MPs, which was a massive scandal. The Daily Telegraph, the story that had that, actually bought what was stolen goods. But it was okay because it was in the public interest. Is that how you learn where the lines draw? Would you have paid for those stolen goods?
Well, again, public interest. It's a very important thing. It's not public curiosity, it's public interest. It's when the interest of the public is at stake. That's the line. I mean, when I write in a story, I need to be sure that my readers are going to get something out of it, which is not just curiosity. It's some knowledge that will help them, and it will help their society to do better. So that's important.
High principles, society as well. Best wishes to Frabrizio, Aurelia and Alex, future journalists. Let's speak to a veteran. 7:36 GMT. This is Newsday from the BBC. You know, one of the great things about radio is that it's very easy to broadcast in the dark, and television can't. I'm standing, and have been standing since it was dark, in central London, just off Parliament Square, the very heart of political power here in Britain. We've been joined just in the past half hour by a load of television journalists, because now the sun has risen, they can actually do their broadcasting. And the reason that we're all here agog is that in just a few hours, Lord Justice Leveson, who has been speaking to 600 witnesses and has spent months writing what's going to be a very, very large report, is going to bring out his recommendations on press regulation in Britain. The press has been misbehaving badly, but it isn't regulated at the moment. A little earlier, we heard somebody describe the British press as the best and the nastiest in the world. Does it have to be the nastiest in order to be the best? Indeed, is it the best? But also, what are we so scared of? Press regulation. We haven't had it in Britain since 1696. We have a panel of, I think we're warming up slightly, aren't we, of journalism students. Alex from Scotland, Aurelia from Austria, Frabrizio from Italy. Maybe Frabrizio and Aurelia, this is a question for you. This is going to be the big issue here in Britain. Is it just a very British issue, this obsession with freedom of the press? Do you look at all these arguments about whether or not there should be a statutory body or an independent body or self-regulation and just think, what are they fussing about? It works fine. What's it like in your own country, in Austria, for example?
Well, in Austria, we do have some regulation, especially for public broadcasting. But in general, we haven't had any scandals with the press misbehaving as it was in Britain. So it's not as much of a question. I think we have to make a distinction, though, between press regulation and to break the law. Phone hacking was something that broke the law, and that's why people are so angry about it. I'm not sure if tighter press regulation could improve the situation.
One thing that's greatly offended people, or sort of public opinion in Britain, I think, Frabrizio, has been ordinary people, particularly sort of the families of murder victims or children who are ill, who have their privacy invaded, they would say, by the press. Could such a thing happen in Italy?
Well, in Italy, if you're a journalist, you are a member of a board of journalists, so you have to be. There is no way you can be a journalist without passing an exam.
You have to be authorised.
Yes, absolutely. And once you are authorised, you know, you have an ethic of conduct which you have to respect. And this, I don't think this would happen. I haven't heard it happening at least.
Now, Alex, from Scotland, you're going to become a British journalist, we hope. Would you consider signing up, for example, to, you know, a code of conduct or something like that? Do you want somebody looking over your shoulder telling you how to do your job, or do you think that you can learn it, you can train, you can get trained to do it properly?
I think we are trained to do it properly at university. I think the way the press is at the moment is fine to me. I mean, they should be more accountable, yes, but it would be a shame to see a British press that has great tradition of a mixture of tabloid and broadsheet journalism to then suddenly have less freedom. I think that would be a real shame, but maybe more accountability is needed in the tabloid sense.
Now, Alex raises an interesting question I want to take to you other two guys about this split between the highbrow press, the press that used to come in a broadsheet, and the small press, which is full of gossip and so on. Do you think that there are two laws in journalism? Do you think that you look at, for example, a newspaper like The Times, one type of journalism. You look like a newspaper like The Sun, a very different type of journalism. Do you think that they can be ruled by the same rules?
Yeah, there should be a basic line, an ethical line in journalism, not to harm the public, obviously. I mean, it caters to two different audiences, and it's important to have that variety in the press, and that's also why the British press is put so high and sometimes even put as an ideal of journalism.
But what do you think of the dirty side of journalism? I mean, did that rather shock you when you came to Britain and you saw quite how filthy some British newspapers can be?
Well, it's important to have an aggressive press. The thing is, the line is very fine between going too far and not representing public interest.
But can you draw that line legally? Who should draw that line? Because that's the heart of the question, isn't it?
That's very difficult, and I hope we'll hear some more about that once the Leveson Inquiry is over.
And that's why the Leveson Inquiry is genuinely interesting, because millions of people, I should say lots and lots of people in Britain, do actually read a daily newspaper. It's part of the culture. Frabrizio, I was talking with Frabrizio a little bit earlier, that in Italy only about 10% of people read a newspaper. And, if you're going to have a lot of newspapers, there's a lot of interest in that. And that's why we're here, absolutely freezing, at the foot of Parliament, waiting for Lord Justice Leveson to unveil or maybe unleash his findings on press regulation and what the future should be here in Britain. GMT, this is Newsday, and yesterday we were live outside the Houses of Parliament, freezing our noses off as we waited for the findings of the inquiry into the future of the British media. Now today the discussion in the newspapers is about how much control needs to be exerted on journalists, because Lord Justice Leveson said journalists had been very, very bad in Britain and something had to be done. Lots of reaction in this morning's newspapers. My favourite is the Independent newspaper, which makes a joke of the fact that today's papers are tomorrow's chip wrapper. You put your fish and chips in old newspapers traditionally, and they're suggesting that maybe the political reaction to a Leveson report might lead to the report being used for that, because it won't be applied. We were joined yesterday in the cold by some journalists of the future, journalism students here in London. I'm pleased to say that they've come back for more, this time in the warmth of the studio. So we're joined once again by Frabrizio, Aurelia and Alex from Scotland, Austria and Italy. Right, Alex, let's start with you. First off, how do you think the papers are covering the news on the papers? Always a bit tricky. How have they done it?
Yeah, it's difficult, but I think they've done a pretty good job. There's so much to cover, and every paper seems to, every broadsheet seems to have such huge amounts.
And they all have their axe to grind as well. I mean, I was flicking through The Guardian, which has kind of like 12 pages on it. I can't remember. It's kind of like when a president dies, they do 12 pages on it and so on. What emerges from it? Is there a general consensus in the coverage?
Well, I've got the Independent here in front of me, and I think it's difficult to say. I think they're not sure whether or not it's going to be statutory regulation or not, or how what we can basically take away from what Leveson has said and now what David Cameron has said. It's going to be difficult to find out whether Cameron agrees with Clegg and Miliband over this issue. Let's
get a perspective from Austria and from Italy, Frabrizio and Aurelia. A lot of the papers, I think, are saying, oh, goodness me, a body to oversee us. It's going to be an assault on press freedom. Do you think that this is a very British fuss about this point of principle? That actually, from your perspective, do you think it matters at all that there should be a body overlooking the newspapers, Fabrizio?
Well, if it's the body that I kind of understood that Leveson wants to set up, I don't think journalists should fear about the freedom of speech and their possibilities to cover stories. At the same time, I can see their point, but I think they're making a very, very big fuss about something that shouldn't deserve so much coverage.
And Aurelia, if you were going to go on and work in Australia, would you expect to be overlooked and supervised in this kind of way, some kind of like independent body observing what you did as a journalist?
Yeah, I'm actually quite pleased with the Leveson report. I think it would improve the working conditions of journalists in the UK, because it also states that journalists would have a helpline to report if they are pressed into immoral behaviour.
Now that's interesting, an immoral hotline for journalists. Do you think many journalists would pick up the phone and say, I'm being immorally pressed? I'm not sure that they would. Do you think that would actually work? It's an interesting proposal.
Well, I think in some journalistic environments, the deadlines can be very pressing, and it's hard to find a story that will make the front page.
So you cut corners, don't you? And this is something that has led to quite a lot of problems. Apart from anything else, when you read the digests and you follow the inquiry, were you surprised with what emerged, the kind of things that journalists had got up to?
not very surprised, but yes, I'm disappointed. If you know.
Because you expected more of British journalism?
Yes,
or what?
Of course
Really?
I did. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I'm Italian, but I have standards.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that you have to assume that the British have standards as well. You cannot bribe or twist the British journalist, is the famous thing. But so okay, right? So they're doing all right in the papers and so on. I mean, one thing that I can just read upside down. It says PM defies press victims. Do we hear enough, do you think, from the people who appear in the papers, the victims of phone hacking or the victims of intrusion or the victims of privacy? Because usually their stories just disappear. Do we hear enough of that side of the story, do you think?
Not really, no. I think if you look at the papers, there's not, I haven't seen a single interview with one of the phone hacking victims, what they think about the report.
That's interesting, because we had a victim on the programme yesterday who was very interesting, talking about what it was like to be monstered by the press. Guys, stay with us, because you've got the papers, and we want to hear more about what you, the journalists of the future, think about the complaints of the journalists of now, I suppose. And we've been looking at big papers. We'll have a look at little papers as well. But for now, stay with us, guys. Thank you very much indeed to Frabrizio, Aurelia. Exactly. It's 5 to the hour. Now, do you want to wreak havoc with people's lives and deploy covert surveillance and deception? Then become a British journalist. That's the description of some of the British press by Lord Justice Leveson. You may remember that we were yesterday just outside Parliament waiting for the report into the culture, practices and ethics of the British press. The report is out. It's pretty damning in parts, and we were joined yesterday and are joined again now by several journalism students from London's City University. Looking ahead, they've come out of bed early, unlike students. Very keen, these journalists. Now, please, 1, 2, 3, just introduce yourselves again, and then we'll ask you for reactions and so on.
Hi, I'm Aurelia.
And I'm Frabrizio.
And I'm Alex.
In reverse order, Scotland, Italy and Austria. Right, Alex, if I can start with you. Do you still want to be a journalist after this?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think it seems like the reaction to Leveson's inquiry has kind of been quite a general consensus of they agree with what he has said, but on the other hand, I think people are less happy with David Cameron's reaction to.
That's interesting, because he's being accused of siding with the press barons, hasn't he? One thing I noticed, Fabrizio, when you came in here, you were doing a panning shot on your iPhone, taking a bit of video for twittering and webbing later and so on.
Correct.
Do you feel that these kinds of findings have any relevance to the sort of journalism that you are going to do in the digital world, in the new world of journalism? Well,
assuming that I would step into the digital world, of course. I mean, they do have a relevance. Maybe they don't have a low requirement, but they do have a relevance. I mean, Leveson just wrote one page about the web. And,
really? Is that all? Just one page on the web? But surely the web is the future, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes, I think it is. It's you need to distinguish when talking about the web, about citizen doing journalism and journalists.
Yes.
Someone who makes a profit out of it, and someone who's just like blogging about their cooking skills or cat videos. So it's
don't knock the cat video. I'm a big fan of the cat video.
Me too. But there is a big difference between the two.
Aurelia, one thing that has come out of some of the coverage here is here we are. We have the government sympathising with press barons as well. When you're training as a journalist, are you taught about those lines of influence, the people that will be pressing on your work, that will want you to write one way or another way?
Oh yes, of course. Ownership and political influence in journalism is very important, and we are taught about different theories of the media and also about propaganda models, advertising. It all plays into each other, and it's very important for, as a journalist, to are aware of these influences and ideally counteract it, because what we want to do is objective journalism. And
out of all the fuss and all of this, are there any journalists that come out of this that you actually admire, that you think, yeah, actually I'd like to do their job? Or do you actually admire people like Hugh Grant coming up and taking on the papers?
It's a mixture. You admire journalists who, like, I guess you're going to say Nick Davis, who's broken the phone hacking story. Right. I mean, that would be one that instantly comes to mind. But I think also you've got to admire the fight that these Hugh Grant wants, for example.
And also the ordinary people who haven't been scared to take on the press. Guys, thank you so much for joining us again. Leveson by the journalists of tomorrow here on Newsday.